I'm going to let Derek start. I got a little treat for you today. I want everybody to picture this as like front porch conversation. And I want you to imagine yourself with your congregation sitting in a tiny little neighborhood where all gifted people are. Only gifted people. That means every single human being would count. All right? So, I'll let Derek take it away.
Good morning. I'm Derek. I'm Derek Kemp. I'm from Broadway also. I would be what normal people would call me, a photographer, but everyone at Broadway have these unique titles. So my official title is a roving illustrator. We have a roving listener, roving illustrator. When DeAmon told me about this event, I sat down and I thought about what I do as a photographer and how it could relate to what you guys do. And this is what I came up with. I call it light and shadows. It takes light to take a photograph. It takes the artistry of light manipulation or the capitalization to create a masterpiece. But a masterpiece would be nothing without shadows. The artist knows how to read shadows to see or hear the light, or to see or hear the story that the light is trying to tell you. I remember as a child, I used to go sailing. I'm from Belize. I know, what am I doing in America? And we used to go sailing. And as a child, I would get to be on deckhand, and I would always be so fascinated that how would the captain, normally my grandfather, my uncle, how do they know? They'd say, prepare to come about, prepare to come about. But the sails would be flat still, and all of a sudden, woof, the wind would come, and I was like, this is beautiful. How do they know this? Few years later, they told me it was called reading the waves. I'm like, how do you read the waves? You look for the light, the light reflecting off the surface of the ocean, and then you look for a shift in the light. And the light will shift, and you see the shadows, and the shadows is going to start coming. So in essence, by learning to read the waves, by learning to see the light, you can actually see the wind. Noticing shadows. And I say shadows not to be confused with darkness. Shadows. Because the darkness is actually the absence of light. Like you can see me now because of light. If we were in total darkness, I would be invisible.
So how do we make the invisible visible? How do congregations take what's seemingly invisible and make it visible? Now, first thing that the theory and practice that we live by in our neighborhood is that we look for the light in everybody. What's noticed around our neighborhood is shadows. In the 4-block radius around the church, there are about 4,000 people, with as many labels as stars in the sky. And I don't mean positive ones. Right? Right, Eric? Right. And in the place that people assume that people can't. People won't. Well, about 10 years ago, I took a journey with my friend, Reverend Mike Maverick. And as we took a journey, we wanted to figure out what is the call of our congregation in this parish. And we said, after about 6 months with neighbors and and some congregation members, we said our call is to be good neighbors. That's what Jesus would have done. That's what he did. As a matter of fact, my friend Walter Brueggemann says that the Old Testament it talks about from scarcity to abundance. And the only way you get abundance is seeing the light, is seeing each other. In the gospel text in Acts 3, anybody remember the lame leap for joy? Right? The lame beggars, most of the people bring him to the front gate, the beautiful gate to ask for alms. You know, it was the modern day food pantry. This guy was labeled with the disability. They bring him to the gate, and the thing that they were doing wasn't bad. But the key thing is, how did this miracle happen? We all know that at the end, Peter and John said that silver and gold we have none, but we give you all that we have in the name of Christ. Get up and walk. We know that. But the more important part of this scripture is when Peter and John said they intently looked at the lame person, the person that was labeled. We intently looked at him. And then they asked him to look at us. Now imagine in places where we do social service things, and even in our church where we have food pantries and things where we serve people, how many times do we really see people? We see the darkness, and sometimes we see the shadows. But we hardly ever have a practice of seeing the light. So, in the 4-block radius of this place, when we moved here and figured this out, we said, how are we going to do it? Well, in hindsight, when I look back, our premise is that we find the gifts of people first and foremost. Right? We build structure and practice around that. Not just in the neighborhood, but also with the people in our pews. So that means every single person counts. In our place, you would probably never hear the word disability. But you would hear the word gift hundreds of times. Because what we want to do is practice intently looking at people. So, but it hasn't always been that way. So the pastor there, Reverend Mike now, my best friend, has been there 28 years ago. He was there as the associate pastor. They called him pastor of the streets. One of the neighbors called him the hoodlum priest. But at this time, he had confessed to me that he had did a horrible thing. As he was telling me this story, he said, you know, we ran really good programs in our place. And one of the things that we were proud of is our summer program. The Lily Endowment, which is 4 blocks away from us. We probably have the richest poor neighborhood in the country. Right? They funded, we served 250 young people. We built every week around a spiritual principle. Devotions in the morning, devotions in the afternoon. He said, I patted myself on my back so hard that I almost broke my arm because he felt so good about what he was doing. But the last 9 months he was there, he did 9 funerals for 9 young men, all under the age of 24. Now, just last week, we looked at this mural. It was actually 23 people at this time that passed away. Now we have a dilemma, right? Our church has a dilemma. We say we were here to change people's lives. 9 young men. That's not good enough, as Reverend Mike told me. He goes on to say to me, I don't want to help a few people beat the odds, but I want to change the odds for everybody. Now that's the thing that stuck with me. And it stuck with me because it helped me see that even myself, in the midst of all the trauma and the things in my life, that I was worth something, that I was a child of God. And if that's true, then every single human being with the label has stars. So we morphed into what my title is. It's called the Roving Listener. And my job description goes like this. I go out and find the gifts and talents of everybody in the life of the community. Find a place for that gift. Celebrate that gift in ways that build community, economy, and mutual delight. I think I have the best So I was a stay-at-home dad, and in the practice that I was doing, I was asking Mike, how did I get this title? He said, that's what you do every day. We believe that in our church, that mission isn't something we create, it is something we do. He heard the story about my grandfather planting a tree and gathering stories around. And I guess with the way threads work in our lives, if you go back, if you can see the thread, you will find a fine line for what you're passionate about all the way back thousands of years ago, if you take a dare to look. So my job, I would go door to door, block, 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 youngest to the oldest. And I remember the first time when I started to get into this, I was like, oh my God, this is the hardest thing that I've ever seen. Can anybody figure out why? Well, I'm going out to find gifts, right? I'm going out to find gifts. Now, our church has been a big part of this. That every time we would see people, we would ask how poor they were, how needy they were. And we never asked about their gifts. So when I go in, it was foreign language. But let me tell you how God works. God is an observer of gifts. So I got to just be with people, sit in people's living room. I was a stay-at-home dad at the time, put my daughter on my back and just hang out in places other people wouldn't hang out. You see, what the stories that my grandfather told me about Jesus, that's what I thought he did. So disability didn't have any meaning to me. The word I can't did. And so I'd go in and I'd discover, and here was the eye-opening moment. A 9-year-old girl comes in and I said, I think I know what you want. My grandmother makes great pies. And then she goes on to tell the story about what she do with her pies. Now she sells these things to churches on the holidays, the pies. Now in a place where we think economy doesn't exist, with the people that are poor, the people that are labeled, yet economy is happening underneath. So how do we observe the gifts? How do we intentionally look for them and then ask people to look back at us, to reflect their gifts back at us? So after about 8 months, or at the end of each week, I find a host on every block, and every meal, community meal happened in the person's house. And what I did, I invited the church and our community development corporation. Stop them at the door. And I said, when you enter this place, your job is to listen. You can't talk. I did that because for years that people in institutions only heard what people thought they wanted to hear. They didn't see the truth because there was a fine line between being formal and informal. And we make everything formal. But the real power happens in the informality. Right? So, we go in, we do that, and about 8 months later, in this very poor place, we found in the 4-block radius over 45 gardeners, 26 artists, cooks, people that cared about young people. Right? These are all the things that left. And then I would have meals. The first meal I had was with the group of gardeners. And I only got them together with no agenda and only because they cared about the same thing. After about 9 months and some long story, they ended up selling their produce to the hospital. Now this becomes important because people think we're poor, we're unable, that they wanted to come teach us. Right? But when you build a structure around gifts, that doesn't happen. Right? So what we did is said, you can't come into our neighborhood to do things without investing in the good and the health of people. So that's one part of the thing. And then we got a little bit better at it. We found, like, yeah, this gives us energy. So then we ended up, instead of having me the only roving listener, we hired young people and their families to go out to meet their neighbors. And they did 3 things. They named the gifts of their neighbors. They celebrated and blessed those gifts. So sometimes the kids would actually lay hands and pray and celebrate and and bring groups of neighbors to their house. And then connect them to people that like the same thing. Out of that, a couple of things happened. I was walking through the neighborhood one day, and there's a lady named Mrs. Kimbrough. There's a few characters to this. Mr. Kimbrough was her husband, elderly couple. Myself, Reverend Mike, and David Officer. All of these people have some broken part of them. Mike has tachycardia. I struggle with depression pretty severely sometimes. I'm dyslexic. David suffered through depression. Mr. Kimbrough had about several strokes. Mrs. Kimbrough was just worried. Now, Mrs. Kimbrough would kidnap me sometimes, kidnap me so long that my wife would have to come get me in about 6 hours. She was a stern, sharp, witty old lady. She guarded. And let me tell you how the Spirit works in this. When you think you go for one thing, you get another. So she patented this thing called the Talking Cookbook. Now remember, this is a 4-block radius where people think people didn't do anything because of their labor. And she patented the cookbook, and she grew up in a single home, and she got stories from her neighbors, and she created this cookbook for other families that are starving. So I thought, this is what we're going to do, a YouTube channel and all that stuff. And she confessed to me one day, I am really worried about my husband. Now, at this time, when I would go over there every day for about 3 months, that I hardly see Mr. Kimbrough. He was shoved away in the day program. We're all familiar with things like that. And when I hear the stories about Mr. Kimbrough, it didn't fit with what I saw. One day he stumbled down the stairs and Mrs. Kimbrough cussed him out. And he said, tell this boy the story about how we were the first black golf person in our neighborhood to be in the golf club. And at that moment he dropped his cane and he stands up straight. Now mind you, Mrs. Kimbrough really mad now because she wouldn't do it for him. I mean, he wouldn't do it for her. He talked about how many people, he showed me all his trophies and all the people he did talk to, and he told me he was an entertainer. And he forgot at that moment that he had several strokes. His arms kind of straightened up, his eyes lit up. And then he said, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to go out back on the golf course one more time. All right, and I'm going to switch part of the story to my friend David Officer. Our friend David Officer. David Officer is struggling with depression, and one of the reasons why is that when he was a radio personality, one of the summers he took his son swimming, and he saw him pass away right in front of him. Just nothing he could do about it. Very smart man, very intelligent, and a voice of a God. But ever since then, everything he did failed. He struggled. His thinking was up here, but his output was down here. Sometimes like me, you know. So at the end of this, I went back to tell Reverend Mike, I said, we're going to do this cookbook, and he says, no, you're not. He said, I want you to connect David Officer. David Officer just got fired from our summer thing that we were doing. One of the neighbors fired him. And he needed some money to go to his other son's graduation in New York. So he brought him here, and he said, I want you to take David over to the Kimbroughs. Now, me being self-righteous, I said, absolutely not. And I whispered to him, everything he did has failed. And Mike said, you won't have a job if you don't do this. So we get them together, we connect them, and we sit there, and we all started to plan this golf outing, as precipitated by Mr. Kimbrough. David Officer so happened to love golf and tennis, so they had a lot of things in common. Mrs. Kimbrough is really happy because one of the things she said to me is that, DeAmon, I want to see my husband free, and I need to be free so I can use my gift. So we all got planning to do our thing, and Mr. Kimbrough, you know, he gets to shave. He goes back to the barber that he hadn't been in 20 years. He'll see a couple of his friends. Now, I didn't go to the golf outing because I had an engagement to do with my son. I get a call the next day. I walk up to the office in my church, and Mrs. Kimbrough on the phone. Mr. Kimbrough passed away in his sleep. And I broke down into tears because I felt really, really bad that I did this. And she told me, baby, don't worry. She said, Mr. Kimbrough did what he was supposed to do, and I want to thank you for being a healer. David Officer calls, and he busts into tears because he's feeling awful. Imagine what he had felt. And I'm glad Mrs. Kimbrough had called me, and I reminded him that you are a healer. If it wasn't for you, the person that we thought wasn't capable, that Mr. Kimbrough wouldn't have gotten his last request. You see, being a neighbor, they were all neighbors. In the church, we're just connectors. We're like geese. Invisible agents for social change. Now that sounds easy, but I'm going to tell you it's hard, especially when you're battling with structures that are square, that are made 100 years ago, when we used to have the largest church in the state of Indiana, not the largest United Methodist church, but the largest church. And now we're down to a couple hundred people, and people worried about money. People worried about closing its doors. We still have committees. We still had committees that fit 3,000 people, even though we were down 200. How many of us churches are filled with committee slots? That's what we spend our time doing, right? Well, one of the lay people in our place said that we're going to stop doing that. And we're going to get rid of all the committees. And he said we have to build structures, soft structures to fit this work. To get hard evidence, to be able to make what was once invisible visible. We kept everything, but we got rid of everything but the governing body, right? The finance committee, and then we created something called the animators of the human spirit, because people needed permission, right? I mean, it's got to go to the pastor to do everything, or the committee to get voted. Well, we learned we had to do away with those things. The other thing that we had was that we had people pretending that things existed because they always happened that way. So we had the same two people for the last 80 years doing the same thing. You know what I'm saying, right? This is in any church I've been to around the country, we struggle with this. So when we got rid of that, we had to build structures in the service, in the church that fit the work on the outside. Right? So when we got rid of those committee things, we did something bad, and we learned what we learned on the way, that wasn't really always a smart thing. But what we did learn, we learned about greed. So people would pretend that we had a clothing pantry. Clothes stacked up to this ceiling. The old women got tired of doing it. Nobody else wanted to take it on, but people still bringing clothes. Right? And you can imagine people are feeling really bad by what's not happening. So we buried it. And we started burying the things that weren't really happening. We know we needed people to grieve. So what we would do is that we would bring those women up. We brought those women up, and we said, everybody, and I want, for those who are able, would you stand? Stand. And this is what we did. I want to mock this, so you got to feel the power of how this happened in service. They said, all of you that participated and supported this clothing pantry, would you stand? You all stand. And the ladies, about 6 of them standing up there now, about 80 and 90 years old, they said, well done, good and faithful servant. Say that. Well done, good and faithful servant. And at that time, you saw those women gasp and breathe in sigh of relief. and the closing pantry disappeared. Take a sip. You see the power of setting structure. And so we kept burying those things until we ran out of things to bury. And the last thing we buried was the things that was always done that way. And so everybody stood, right? Y'all have to bear me. They said, for everyone that has done it because we all done that way, would you please stand? And then we did our little thing. Well done, good and faithful servant. And then we needed to celebrate the ministry's continuing. Now, remember going back to me walking the streets, being on people's porches. One of the people I found out about was a girl named Maya. Now, Maya did tutoring at our house on the weekends. This becomes important because we did a tutoring program, and we asked for volunteers from the church. We asked for volunteers from Lilly, Pharmaceutical, all the suburbs, but we never asked for tutors from our neighborhood because people were lazy. All you saw was dark. So I gave Mike a call. I know this lady named Maya. She teaches tutoring. He said, just give her a call. And he called her. He said, DeAmon says you teach tutoring at your house. Explain it. He said, I teach everything from phonics to Sophocles. He said, young people that are starting and having trouble, they do phonics. They're good readers, they read Sophocles. At the end of the week, what she would do is invite the families over and let them hear their children read on the barbecue in their backyard. Now, as a church, we shouldn't be trying to create something that's already happened. But if we can't see it, so seeing, remember, finding and discovering those gifts is a helpful thing. And now, what we need to do is to celebrate those things. So what we did something that we normally don't do. We invited Maya to church, and we wanted to celebrate her ministry beginning. Derek, come here for a second. I didn't use you as a prop. So you know, Maya lived in this neighborhood for like 30-something years. She'd been a part of the programs at the church, but she was never invited into the sanctuary. Sometimes when you think you're invited, you're really not. So we invite Maya, and we know Maya was new. Everybody knew it because she comes and she sits in the front row. We ask Maya up, and Maya comes here, and the animator of the spirit, face me. And the animator of the spirit took from the wedding liturgy, and he told the story about what Maya was doing. And he said that everybody that would do everything in their power to uphold and support Maya's ministry, would you say we will? We will. Let's say it again. We will. And at that moment, Maya did not know this because she was sitting in the front row. But when she heard it, it thundered. She turns around, facing the crowd. I should have put a string on. And you see what happened? Eyes caught. And two things became visible that wasn't visible before. Maya saw a congregation that started with charity and now see her gift and celebrating that. And the people in our congregation saw somebody in our parish that they never saw before. Anybody read the novel Invisible Man? Thanks, Jerry. And where the man, he goes out and tries to find his true self. And what strikes me about this, he talks about being invisible. He said that he was a figment of people's imagination, with people with disabilities, people that sit on margins, that their gifts are figments of our imagination. He goes on to say that it's not the invisibility that is the issue of mind. It is in the construction of the eyes that look at us. How do we build and construct structures of eyes that see gifts? that celebrate gifts, that connect gifts in ways that build community, economy, and mutual delight. You know, when we write little grants and stuff, one of the things on our form, it says, what is the greatest need in our neighborhood? And my friend Pastor Mike, when we pull the grant, this is what he puts on the line. The greatest need is the need to be needed. How much time I got? 30 minutes. Good. Does anybody have any thoughts? Derek, would you pass this? Anybody have any questions or comments before I go into this last little this exercise we're going to do? Because I might have missed something. This is 13, 14 years in the making. And actually, my grandfather would say it was 500 years in the making.
It's more of a comment. Thank you, DeAmon, for one, for sharing your passion, for continually saying yes to your mission, and for the courage that you've been given and that you're giving us. Thank you very much for that. I just, for those of us here who presume to call ourselves theologians, I think one of our main jobs should be to be a roving listener and to be seeing the presence of the Holy Spirit in the world, even especially in the places where we and others don't expect it. So I wonder what you think of, you're doing that work. You're something of a roving theologian, and yeah, any comments? Thank
you. I think about my own church community, and when we've gone through the community and put flyers in mailboxes and that sort of thing. And a barrier that I sensed when we did that was I felt that they would not have even opened the door had we knocked on the doors. So did you run into any barriers when you went into the community to talk to the persons just to get them to open the door and then to engage in conversation with you? What kinds of things, how did you mitigate that?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I thought at that moment, and then I'm going to tell you what I learned in hindsight. In the moment, in the beginning, I used to knock on the door. Now, I lived in this neighborhood. And when you knock on the door and you say you're from Broadway, even though I lived in the neighborhood and people knew me, the door got shut. In hindsight, I realized that every time a church or an institution left a neighborhood, people felt worse. So why open the door? Because all they ask is about the needs and cover, being able to exist as an institution, not the well-being of the human nature. Also, I learned about the power of being a neighbor. So when I tell the young people in our neighborhood, we do this every day. If we had a bus stop and we need direction, then we ask somebody. Then we engage in the conversation. Sometimes we stumble, right? We stumble into what God's magnificence is. So I just started saying, hey, I'm your neighbor down the street. And that was magnificent. I got everybody to let me in because they knew I was coming. There's this guy down the street that want to hear about your gifts, right? And I had them introduce me to people. So I never cold called. And once you practice it so much, nothing in life is ever a cold call, especially when you develop the eyes to see good connections. Those are God eyes right there. So anyway, that answered a little bit.
It does. Thank you very much.
Take right here. Take this last one.
You want to respond to being a roving theologian?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Absolutely. And the thing is that I was always this. Derek and I have been doing these documentaries of where I grew up at. Man, what I've been doing since I was a kid, my great-grandparents were doing. And that's all good and dandy. But the power of way a congregation and people in congregations can have is they can make that visible. It was Reverend Mike saying, looking at me different. Not looking at me as somebody that don't have a high school diploma. Right? Not looking at me as somebody that's severely dyslexic. ADD. Go through depression. Do you sound like you could use that? I mean, seriously. But what you can use is that I'm a gifted storyteller. And I know that because I come from a great line of storytellers. Because I've been told that by my neighbors and my family. So look for what's already there, and I like your comment about that. That is the whole essence.
I want to thank you for your amazing presentation. This is my first year at the institute, and I'm bountiful at home where people appreciate God. Why are you going back? Why can't you get this material online? But with presentations that you and other people, I think I begin to realize more and more you cannot get the same effect online. You cannot get the same experience only by reading your work. You have to be here. You have to be with everyone. And I thank you so much for the amazing material. And by the way, I love what your teacher said.
Thank you.
Did you catch that?
I missed the last part. The last.
By the way, I love what your teacher said. A T-shirt says, yeah, T-shirt, not T-shirt. But the other part about realizing that people, this is our third year, Jerry Ann's third year, people say, why can't you get the material online? And she says, you got to experience it by being here, and that's been even more true, I think, and thank you for that part of that.
Tell me, what's your name? Jerry Ann. Jerry Ann, I love you. Thank you. And you know what's powerful about what she said? That's not only true. That is not only true with the work we do. Like when we do programs, you know, we set up all type of forums. We spend a lot of time creating square structures. But we never be there. Be present. You know, that was going back to Acts 3, right? When we intently looked at him. We looked at him with intent. But the other part, like she said, they asked, look at us. Being present. Being mindful. That practice of that. One of the ways I've learned that practice in 2010, I was in South Africa, in Guguletu, right, a township of Cape Town. And I was doing some work at a Presbyterian church, Jail Swanee, with the pastor, Reverend Spiwo Safile. One of the most popular pastors around the place where they did things around HIV and AIDS when people weren't doing that stuff. They took the risk. So I'm there, and he got me some work doing some consulting with the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. Right? Now, they were setting up these programs to collect stories. Now, how many of us know that stories are important? I do. They impact my life greatly. And they were doing this thing where they would document and stuff, and they wanted to put the stuff in the cameras in the hands of young people. but the only conversation they could talk about is the disability of poor people. Now, I love the Truth and Reconciliation and what they represent, but it's only a microcosm of what we do in institutions. So we're in the blank room and they say, Mr. Rogan-Lister, what do you think about things? And the first thing I said, that there are no people from the townships here part of this conversation. We're in a room with blank walls and we're talking about stories. And then I say, where did the food come from? And they were really proud. And I said, we got this from the Cape Town downtown this thing. And I said, what about the cooks that are in the townships, in Khayelitsha and Guguletu and Manningburg? And they said, we don't know him. Now, that wasn't really true. But people's minds, we don't think about being present. So I get on the phone. Eric knows I'm good for venturing off. In the places where people say don't go, I'm going. And I'll be spending the night at somebody's house afterwards. So I had spent all this time in this neighborhood. I met some good friends and I got kidnapped by South Africa in a good way. In a good way, I should say that. But I'm there and I meet cooks and artists. Man, one little guy took my camera and his neighbors brought the camera back. And you should have saw the photos him and his friends took. I showed the people those photos in the camera. And I got on the phone with some cooks. And they told the story. Said, we got an exhibit here. Now, I just left Guguletu and there wasn't no exhibit up. By the time I got back, one of the most extravagant exhibits that was there. And they created a relationship. And I don't know what ended up happening with the story with them. But I can tell you that what we have is already present in our congregations and in our communities. I'm going to say it one more time. Abundance is already there. We just have to see it. Now, one of the other things that I learned is a powerful thing. I'm going to do this exercise, but let me set some context for it. In South Africa, Safile was walking, and young men, they don't respond to hi. But what they do respond to is sawubona. Everybody say sawubona. Sawubona means I see you. And then there's two responses. Yabo sawubona. Say that. Yabo sawubona means is I see you also. Or the other response is sakona. Say it, sakona. Sakona means it is good to be seen. Like namaste, right? That I was learning that these greetings about seeing was very important. When we originally wanted to say hi, we were really trying to say, I see you. That's what we're really trying to say. Not this. Peter and John wasn't looking at that, right? They were saying, I see you, intently looking at him, looking into the soul of the person. Even though the rest of the church assumed that the lame didn't have any gifts and they were going to help him. So, sawubona. Yabo sawubona. Sawubona. And so as I see you, and it's good to be seen. Right? Oh, I see you also. So look at your neighbor and repeat it, and it can be total chaos if you want. But I want one person to say sawubona and the other to reply. So look at your neighbor, fix your eyes. Say it loud. Good. Good. Together. Everybody. Sawubona. Sawubona. Good job. Good job. And it's just, that's, I tell you that as a reminder, if we're going to start anywhere, it is that. The other thing that's important in structure, especially church structure, is language. I heard somebody was talking about how language is important. And language isn't just verbal language, because language like that is sin. Because it doesn't give a clear picture. But language also is paying attention to how people light up, how people are feeling bad. Those things we do with our neighbors, our husbands, our wives, our partners, our brothers, our sisters, and we amplify it and make it intense. So setting structures around language. The other thing is changing the question. How do we change the question? Right? So in our place, if you say the word boo, need, you get booed. So if I said need, everybody would. And stab me on the corner. And they would correct you and say gifts. So changing that question, what is the gifts? After you get over that part, you realize that you don't even have to ask. You hold those questions. What are you observing about a person's gifts? If you get this, you'll never have to ask that question. You can see it on Facebook. You can see it when you had a cup of coffee. Like him. When I first met him, he didn't have his camera with him, but I know he wanted to. My wife tapped me and said, "Do you see him clicking his eyes like a photographer?" Right? That's what he, look at him, he's laughing because he knows. All the work that you see is his work. That's why we call him the roving illustrator. The other part that we need to pay attention to is how do we celebrate people? Building capacity in church programs has nothing to do with what funders call building capacity. It is all about celebration. When you publicly celebrate those who haven't been celebrated authentically, people want to do more because they have been affirmed. The word sustainability doesn't exist in the funding world. They want to try to get there, but it doesn't. But let me tell you where it does exist at, in friendships. Eric, how long have we been friends now?
Long time. 5 years, 10 years.
About 6. And he always close. The pastor at the church is my best friend. Derek is not only my friend, but he's my new business partner. You see what I'm saying? That sustainability and accountability is you get more out of in relationships than you would in a funding project. Because I can cuss you out as a friend, and you will forgive me most of the time. So sustainability. All of that is wrapped into the structure. The last thing that I'm going to say, and I'll take a few comments and questions, but having guiding principles. My friend Mike Green is how I got connected to Eric. Would come to Indianapolis and hang out with me. And he said, "DeAmon, what you're thinking about, you need to think about what are your guiding principles." Now, these aren't things you create. These are things you are. So we started out with John McKnight's 5 rules from keep becoming the agent of the devil in the middle of the church. Anybody familiar with that? It was out of an article in the 80s called Why Servanthood Was Bad. I'm going to quickly read them to you. I love these. I just see I getting a lot of tweets. Thank you. I don't know why it just popped up. By the way, while I'm looking for this, what my mission at the church now, I'm no longer a paid staff and not been for a long time, but I created what we call the Learning Tree, which is an engagement investment company. We invest in the good of our neighbors, so we're poor philanthropists. We take social capital and turn it into investment. Like the guy, one of the quick stories, we're doing a project called Cultivating Joy. And you know who our biggest partner is? The Ark. Right? We ended up getting funding, I think was that's coming through $500,000 in 5 years to build on the gifts of people. hire them, invest in those folks. That happened at a dinner table. Not only did he say he would get the money, but he would loan his daughter out as a photographer to have more roving illustrators and raise the rest of it and invite people to dinner. So the mayoral candidate is coming to my poor little house that's broken down. Right? And that's kind of happening. But it is very important that we do things informal, practice having meals. One of the practices we have at Broadway is that we celebrate people and things. So one of the meals we had that spurred on this was people that were struggling with depression and had found some way to overcome it. So we call it the Dinner for Healers. Derek went to a meeting for entrepreneurs, and then we had a meal just recently for people that care about economics. There's no agenda at these meals, but the church could facilitate things like that, informal. And you're going to get more input than you would on a Sunday or any program in there, because people really get to see each other. As my girl said right here, we are present in the moment of abundance. Sorry, I'm just talking. I thought they looked for the 5 rules. The first one is never do for someone that they can do for themselves. Now, those who struggle with labels know the power of that. Right? When Mike was in Miami, he was talking with a group of people with mental illness, and when he read that rule, he got a standing ovation. And he asked him why. He said, because no one ever lets us do anything. The second is to find the gifts and capacities of the people you serve. Find a place for them in the community. The third, instead of turn service into income. Because in our neighborhood, this is important. Because what do poor people need in our place? Economics, that's right. So in one of the ways we do that at Broadway is we don't have a food pantry. We don't do the bill assistance, but we still have the money come to that. When people come to us, they get to start talking. We shut them off and we say, tell us about what you're excited about today. The whole conversation, 100% of the time, it changes. They leave out, forgetting, they call right back and say, oh, I forgot I came for assistance. And then we say, look, your gas bill is $600. We only got $50 to give. Even if you went to all the churches, even if you got it taken care of, it'll probably get shut off. So we're going to write you a check. We want you to be, what's that lady name we went? Sarah, right? Sarah Killingsworth. She makes cakes. She knits. Her neighbor she had never met. So the lady, I forget her name really quick, but Miss Rose Garden, and we had her come in and we said, go visit Miss Rose. She hadn't been out the house, bake her a cake, and then come back and talk to her. And she was so excited that she met her neighbor, right? She baked the cake, and now they go watch out for each other. The role of the church is to be good connectors, to be good neighbors, to be good stewards, not only of our building, but our parish. Any last comments?
Apologize if I got this wrong, but I think you said that you don't feel like dyslexia, ADHD, stuff like that is stuff that you can use. And I feel like disability and ability are not opposites, and disability is a fact about my body and how I am in the world, and I found that when I bring everything that I am openly and without downplaying it, I'm much stronger in conveying God's love, and that I can use it because I go into somebody's room in a hospice and they're being treated like they're not really a full person, and they look at me and they know that I get treated that way too. And the staff think of me that way too. And I come in and I say, God loves you and God made you on purpose. I'm credible in a way that people who look non-disabled and people who pretend that they only have socially valued strengths can ever be. So I think that you can use it, and I think you do use it, and I think we've got to use it.
So, absolutely, you know, one of the things that is the perception that these things can't be used. In our neighborhood, that labels, on everything, our economy in our neighborhood is built on labels. So already the perception, if you have this label, you won't be able to do it. Now, our own stories, our own personal stories disprove that, right? We do bring our whole people to us, and we should. But the way we traditionally, in the last 50 years, as institutions have acted, is the opposite of that. Right? So, as a whole person, how do we bring the light into that with label people, and especially fix on that? It is a given that we do have these things that are visible, right? If you're in the chair, it is visible. I don't even have to pretend that. And we sit around and we pretend, like, oh, it's okay, you know, stumbling around it. And then we song and dance. But what we don't do is to pay attention to the thing that the people in hospitals pay attention to. You're right about that. Eric.
First of all, Brother DeAmon, thank you as always for your presentations, because it's always inspiring, and I learn something every time. I think the other thing is, and I want to make a plug, because and without devaluing Mark Crenshaw's presentation and Mark Johnson's presentation, if you get an opportunity to go roving with DeAmon later on this morning, I encourage you to do it. It will change the way you see everything in your life. It'll change the way you walk into a restaurant and notice the people around you that are sitting in the other booths, or the waitresses, and how you interact with them. So I think that the real power of DeAmon and his stories are the ability to listen and the ability to connect with other people. And if we can't connect with other people, then we're really kind of lost anyway. So I encourage you to go out later on this afternoon with him, and thank you as always.
Which might be scary. I'm a children's writer and a minister, and I have several hats that I put on during the week. But I'm helping a ministry in San Antonio that's just designed for people with intellectual disabilities. So we strive every day to find their gifts and to tell them that the church is much more than a building. It's the people and the believers. So I appreciate your presentation and your efforts. But my question is, when I write a story, I always try to have a moral to the story, so that there's a purpose to the story. So my question now becomes, how often do you tell the kids, the families, the purpose of their gifts and the purpose of belonging to a community that is so gifted?
That is a powerful question, a very thought-provoking question. And you know what our answer is we don't tell it. We celebrate it, right? I mean, we try to tell them, and there's verbally, you have to name those things. But we try as a church to live that and create mechanisms to do it. So one, like I told the Maya story, that is built in. We have something now called the Lesson for the Contemporary Church, because God didn't stop when the book went to press. And we have lectionaries on, we have our lectionary and all the gospel texts and Old Testament stuff. Well, we invite people that don't belong or belong to tell a story that match gospel texts. These are people that we consider Christian or not. But their stories are so powerful and God is working through them. And so that is a mechanism that we use. Okay, well, one last one, and we'll close.
Oh, the principles, by the way, are on the website, as well as so there's some handouts that DeAmon sent. In fact, I think he sent like 10 handouts. If you want more of DeAmon, there's plenty there on the website for the Summer Institute.
DeAmon, as a couple that is trying to live into a similar ethos of knowing my neighbors or our neighbors, first of all, find me because we need to connect. Second of all, I just want to hug you.
And I love hugs. I love them. Thank you.
Only a few people between you two, so you can get to that point.
Anybody on my way back, if they want to give me a hug, they can do that too. Right, there you go. So one of the things I want to say connected to the word ability, and with what you're saying, that everything that I'm talking about was made up as we went along. And there is no strategic plan. And all the successes of these sweet little stories you heard was just a series of failures, or seemingly failures. As a matter of fact, when we give out funding, which is probably maybe $500, to get money from us, you have to do 3 things. It's dream, don't do it by yourself, and fail at least 3 times. And the word ability itself doesn't mean you have a God-given gift. The word ability and habit used to be the same word. The word ability came in later. It is a series of practice that you perfect or attempt to. So when people say God-given abilities, what they really saying is practice. Last, I would like to celebrate the rest of you for the work you've done. And I'd like to say, well done, good and faithful servants. Say it to yourself. Well done, good and faithful servants. Thank you.
Thank you, dear.